I don't think that you do what Microsoft does with their operating systems and turn the entire consumer base
Everybody's a beta tester.
into the or for that matter the alpha tester. Welcome to episode 12 of the Frugal Firearms Podcast, the Even Dozen edition. The podcast designed to help you get the most for your money and enjoy shooting at the least possible cost and with the best possible products. And to that vein, today we're talking to the CEO of the ETS group, who is going to talk about magazines. Something that all of us need and a lot of us get frustrated with when they don't work correctly or they wear out and they fail, and they're the biggest failure point in a lot of the guns that are out there. And we're welcoming first to the show from our Northern Command today, up in the communist centroid of Sacramento, California. Ken, say hello to our guests.
Hello, listeners.
And to our listeners. Yes, indeed.
Yes, absolutely. I'm up here, for Thanksgiving, visiting family. So right here, just a few miles away from Liberal Central there in Sacramento, California.
Exactly, and hopefully not the origin point for your for the 40, I guess, eighth president. We're hoping that doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Even though this is not a political show, let's just keep that in mind. And okay, on to our guest. Our guest today, again, as I mentioned, is the CEO and creator of ETS, which are some of the best aftermarket magazines on the market. Welcome to the show, Mr. Eddie Loveday. Eddie, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so the first thing on my mind, and hopefully that of the listeners, is what was the inspiration? You created the company, you told me. And why'd you do that? Because, making parts can be expensive when you're buying molds and stuff like that. And you're up against, the mindset of, well, I have to have, a metal magazine because if I don't, it's crap. So what was your, what was your inspiration, sir?
Well, yeah, so we faced a lot of that when we first got started. So back in, I guess, probably around 2012 is probably the time frame. I have a long history in this industry. I've been on the retail side of things for a long time. I used to work for some distributors and sold some retail stuff, had stores. One of the things that became kind of apparent to me over time was that the firearms space, particularly accessories, because that's where most of my money was made, got more and more crowded. The online revolution sort of came along, right? People sell on the internet. It sort of changed business in general. And that was no different for the firearm industry as well. So one day I sat down and I said, I was looking at Amazon in particular and what a huge sort of monster that thing had become at that point even. And I started thinking to myself, instead of competing with these guys, it would be a whole lot cooler if I was just a manufacturer and they were selling my stuff instead of me trying to compete with them. And so, to be honest with you, that was what drove me down the path of looking at what can I do. And of course, I love the firearm industry. I believe in the firearm industry. I think it's very important to not just kind of where we are in our country, but the history of our country and hopefully where we're going in the future. So I wanted to stay in this industry. And so I had this crazy idea to start a company manufacturing. And I looked around and magazines were one of the things that I felt like there's not a lot of great options out there. And I felt like maybe we could do better. And when I say do better, that could be to make something cheaper. It could be to make it perform better. It could be to make it, like in our case, they're clear, more visibility, whatever the case may be. So we kind of took that approach and I started looking at it. My father is a mechanical engineer.
As am I.
Worked for
me too.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. So he's a mechanical engineer for Siemens in nuclear medicine. So I went to my dad. I said, "Hey, I got this crazy idea. I'm thinking about starting a manufacturing company making magazines and various other things that I had ideas for." And he was like, "Are you sure you want to do that? Manufacturing is not easy. It's expensive and it's a long road." And I said, "How hard can it be, right?" So that's kind of always been, kind of the way I've been in my life. If anybody can do it, then I can do it, is the way I feel about that. So we did. We started Elite Tactical, and Dad helped with some engineering and some of the designs, and I learned how to use CAD and SolidWorks and all the stuff. So it was kind of a self-taught thing over the course of a couple of years, and I spent about a year and a half becoming an expert on plastics. Worked with
Mm.
some people over at BASF in sort of developing our polymer, which we have a patent on now for magazines. And so that's kind of how it started. So, it started with an idea that maybe we could make a magazine that was better. Back then, AR magazines were considered, first of all, inferior if they were plastic. This is kind of back when Magpul was still young, and
Hmm.
and polymer magazines in general were sort of untested and untrue. And so I looked at that and I said, well, maybe we can make a better magazine that's not disposable, that is actually durable enough to sort of hold up over time and not just be tossed aside or crack or break or bend or whatever the case is. And so when I sat out with my list of requirements that I wanted out of the plastic that we were looking at, I had this long list of things that I wanted it to do. And like I said, I would find several that did 7 out of the 10 things, but never found any that did all 10. So we found as close of a plastic as we could. Then we made some changes to it for like UV stability, for example, to make sure that the sun's UV rays doesn't degrade the plastic and all that kind of stuff. So we did that for about a year and a half. We got it where we wanted it. And then we made our first AR magazines. And that's kind of how the company was born. So, there was probably 2 or 3 years of work, so to speak, that went into that before we ever made our first product. And so that's kind of how it came to be.
So for the entrepreneurs out there, and you can choose to answer this any way you want. I mean, again, I already keyed on it and you've backed it up that getting into any kind of manufacturing like this can be a very expensive endeavor. I imagine your break-even point was a few years down the road after you even started selling magazines, and you're fighting the uphill battle of, the perception that a polymer mag, is, as you put it, a disposable item and maybe not worthy of buying in the first place. I mean, at what point did you say that, you know what, I'm succeeding here?
Well, it's interesting because when we first started, again, I think one of the things we tried to do was to try and make a magazine. In my case, one of the things I wanted to do is make it more durable, and that means not breaking, not cracking, not all the things. It has to be creep resistant because they sit fully loaded, right? So creep
Right.
is a phenomenon where basically the plastic molecules untangle themselves and rearrange themselves in a different form. So they'll, like the feed lips, for example, on a magazine will spread over time if that stress limit is exceeded. Without trying to get too nerdy and all this, once we had the polymer there, I knew that it not only would it do what we needed it to do, but I knew that it would be superior in a lot of ways to a metal magazine. Durability, longevity, corrosion, all these things. Now, trying to convince the public at large of that is a different animal altogether, and I'm not going to even pretend to sit here and take credit for that because there's Magpul, there's other people out there. So I think it was just kind of a timing thing where they started to come around, and really technology. When we talk about technology of materials, right, in this particular space, the material that we use for our magazines didn't even exist 7 years before we started using it. I think something like that for our first magazines.
Mm.
So again, you couldn't in the 1980s you couldn't make these magazines the way we make them now because the plastic simply just didn't exist, and our technology wasn't there. So because I know a lot of people when they think of plastics, they think of some of the cheaper plastics that break and crack or get yellowed over time and all those kinds of things. And everybody's had experience with that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we're at a place now where a lot of these plastics do very, very impressive. We've got plastics nowadays that are replacements for metal. I have plastics that are stronger than aircraft grade aluminum, that are carbon fiber reinforced and all kinds of other things. So it's pretty wild stuff out there. And so, getting into that, looking at that, trying to convince people of that who aren't material scientists and aren't engineers is a different animal. And I think what happened, to be completely honest here, is you had sort of a perfect storm. You had plastics being where they were. You had an event that took place in 2012, which was Sandy Hook. When Sandy Hook shooting occurred,
Hmm.
there was such a run on ARs and magazines at the time that the first thing you saw happen was every single metal GI magazine, which was the de facto magazine at the time, was gone. It was off the shelf.
Hmm.
And so what happened was consumers had no choice. but to buy our mag or buy a P mag or buy a Lancer magazine or whatever was left on the shelf at the time, which at the time was probably considered less desirable than the aluminum alternative, right, of a GI magazine. And so people went out and they bought them. And I think what happened is they realized over time, hey, these things are pretty good, and they work and they're durable and they're all the things that a lot of people probably thought they weren't. And so I think that was the sort of the catalyst, if you will, with the lightning strike event that sort of thrust them into people's hands, and let people kind of see what they were and sort of get comfortable with adopting them as a normal thing for their gun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the materials have gone up tremendously. I mean, Craig and I were early adopters. I mean, Craig, you had one of the first Gen 1 Glock 17s ever brought into the US, I
Gen
believe.
2, Gen 2. Yeah. But I mean, the
And,
Gen 1s are very rare and there's not many
oh,
of them
okay.
and stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, I just remember you got that probably almost what, 38 years ago or something like that, a long time ago, but 87, I thought it was
It
37
was
years
pretty much
ago.
as soon as they
As soon as
hit
they
the
hit,
the
yeah,
US market, I was like, oh my God, I have to own this. And you
right,
know,
polymer, and you were like, wow, plastic, and the perception, public perception, I remember at the time of just people didn't trust them, and they were invisible, and they couldn't be found by metal detectors, all sorts of erroneous information going out there. And now, of course, polymers are in many ways, the wave of the future, if nothing else. I also do classic cars, and one of the things we do is auto body repair. That's kind of a fun hobby sort of a thing. And a lot of cars today are glued together. They're glued together,
Mhm.
you
absolutely
know,
there. You should see the
with
cost of those glues, by the way.
Yeah.
exactly. And then again,
They're
this is
insane. Yeah.
yeah, and this is basically, no longer you tack welding things in place, you're gluing a car together. So, yeah, all of these materials that were frankly not available is quite amazing. And the rigidity of the plastic, what I really like, and just the translucent aspect of it, that's great. I love to be able to look into the mag and see that how many rounds you got left. So,
But what's funny about that is when that phase that I was kind of telling you guys about, where we were doing all the materials and trying to find a material that kind of met all the criteria that we needed. Being clear wasn't it wasn't on the list. It
Really?
turned out no, it wasn't. I know. Whenever I tell this story, people they find it to be really a big surprise that we didn't set out to make a clear mag. The fundamental objective was to make a magazine that was affordable and durable and didn't break and didn't crack and didn't do all the things. And when we found this material and it turned out to be clear, because they make it in opaque as well as transparent, and when we found the material, I was like, well, it's clear and that's cool. I think people will like it, but I don't know how big of a deal it is. And of course, like on AR mags and stuff like that, it's a little bit different because the mag, half the mag hangs out of the firearm.
yeah,
In pistols, I tell you what was interesting. One of the craziest things that's happened to me in my time with this ETS adventure is we sort of announced to the world, and I believe it was SHOT Show, going into SHOT Show of 2015, I believe it was, that we were going to be making clear Glock magazines, because we'd had some conversations about the whole thing. And someone said, hey, if you really want to sell a bunch of magazines, if you could make a Glock magazine out of plastic that doesn't cost a fortune and works, then it would be very successful. And I'm like, yeah, how hard can that be? And magazines for pistols have a different challenge altogether than rifle magazines or alternating feed magazines, where the double stack tapers to a single stack. It's an intentional bind on the round stack, and it's a huge amount of stress and all these things. And we can go into that if you guys want to. But at the end of the day, making a pistol magazine out of plastic is much more difficult than making a rifle magazine out of plastic. And so when we announced that we were going to make those and they were clear, I didn't think anybody was going to care, because they're in the firearm. You don't really see them. They don't stick out. And it turns out that we posted a kind of a teaser going into SHOT Show. I think it was on Instagram or something like that. And immediately it got like 700 or 800 comments and thousands of likes and all this stuff. And we were just really, really shocked at how much people responded to the idea of a clear pistol magazine. And I'll be honest with you guys again, after having used these magazines for years now, and I'm the one that has the job of going to test them and shoot them, which kind of led to our speed loaders, by the way, and we could talk more about that. But
Yes, we are.
yeah, and so as I'm the guy who has to go, and there's been days where I've had to shoot 5,000 rounds in a day by myself and load them and do all the things and all that kind of stuff, which everybody says that sounds like the greatest job in the world. And I promise, like everything
No,
else in the world, it
no,
becomes
it's
work
not.
after
Yeah,
it's a rough day with bloody fingers and all the stuff.
that's right.
But what I learned is that when we test a new magazine, we'll take our magazines out to the range. We'll test those. We'll also take OEM magazines, whatever that may be. So like a Sig mag or a Glock mag or whatever it is. Well, after time of using those, I became very addicted to the convenience of having the visibility of seeing what's in the mag. So like if I'm at the range and I've got 10 or 12 mags sitting on the table, I can tell from 10 feet away what not only how many rounds are in the magazine, but what type of rounds are they ball ammo, or are they defense load? What do we got? And after getting used to that for a while, like when I go take a factory magazine to the range, I just get frustrated because I'm like, I can't see in this and I don't like it. So I've gotten used to that. And I know a lot of people think it's not a big deal, and it's kind of like probably like some of the other conveniences that we've gotten used to in the world, like rain sensing windshield wipers. The first time I ever had that in a car, I thought, who needs this? Like, how hard is it to reach up and turn on the windshield wiper, right? But now that I've had it, I don't want to buy a car that doesn't have, you know what I'm saying? So I kind of feel that way about the clear mags, but it was never an objective. It was just one of those things that kind of turned out to be that way. And now it's kind of the thing that we're known for, so it's pretty crazy.
When you went, you said you worked with BASF on the
Yeah.
polymer development, but you said you have the patent, so they didn't keep the patent on the thing they helped you with, or you co-own the patent, or I mean,
No, we got to just so we know. And again, without going too nerdy on this, because now I'm an amateur patent attorney. I joke about that.
I bet you are. Yeah.
But we have a patent on the material as it relates to ammunition magazines.
Oh,
So
okay.
people use it. Actually, this material is used in headlights on cars, and some other medical stuff.
Oh,
So there are other
okay.
industries that use it.
Sure.
It's because of its durability and because of its longevity and all the things. But because we pioneered how to use it and the design changes that were necessary to using it in magazines and all those kinds of things, the patent office did grant us a patent on this material again, as it relates to ammunition magazines.
It's like a utility patent in that context or something like that, I think. Right?
And what it is there, I mean, again, this is something that unless you're a patent attorney, a lot of people don't know, is that you can get a patent on something you didn't necessarily invent if you helped contribute to the development of said thing being used in an area or an art that it wasn't previously used in. So like, for example, for us, the material that we use is not as stiff as metal, for example, right? So there was a lot of work that had to be done to make a magazine that was originally designed for metal and make it out of plastic, because plastic is simply not as stiff, right? The stiffness is just not, the rigidity is not there. So it took a lot to get the magazines to work and do what we needed to do and all the other kinds of stuff. And so because of those things, we got a patent on materials as it relates to, again, very specifically just ammunition magazines, and that's it.
So I have a two-part follow-up to that. And first
Sure.
it has to do with the materials and the designs. And then it has to do with what, at least on your website, is referred to as the ETS way. But the first part of the question goes to the materials. And without naming your competitors, you already named a couple already, but what distinguishes your products from your competition, quite frankly? And what makes you the being Frugal Firearms podcast, we're interested in the value proposition of why would I spend my hard-earned money on you and not somebody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions to answer, because people will ask me these questions like, why should I buy your mag over insert random competitor here? And I think there's a couple things to this. Number one, when we first set out to do this, we tried to provide a strong value proposition to the consumer. And what does that mean? Well, that means a magazine that runs, right? So first of all, if a magazine doesn't work, it's worthless. So making a magazine run, and by the way, that's not nearly as easy as a lot of people think it is. It's very difficult. There's a lot of stuff to go wrong with magazines. They're very finicky. Like we'll make 10,000 magazines in a day, and we have to keep plus or minus 3,000. So for all you people out there who know, that's basically human hair in terms of the specs. And so it's not easy to make magazines, and that's why the real challenge, in my opinion, comes from making a magazine that is good and affordable. It's one thing if we were making magazines like H&K does, and by the way, guys, I love H&K, so this is not a knock on them at all. But the reason, one of the reasons their magazines cost $70 is because they're very meticulous and they scrap a whole bunch of stuff, right? And so that drives the cost up, and consumers eventually pay for that. And
Of course they
so
do.
it's
Yeah.
difficult. It's difficult to try and make something that you want to sell for $15 or $20 or whatever it is, and have a high level of quality control, have a high level of tolerancing, and all the things that make a magazine a good magazine. It's those two things. I'm talking about quality and function and affordability are at odds with each other, right? And everywhere you go, it's a tug of war constantly in the factory between trying to make it as good as you can make it and also trying to keep it affordable so that consumers can buy them. And so I think what sets us apart is we sort of have pioneered clear magazines, especially when it comes to pistols. We have a new line of magazines out now, which are hybrids, which sort of incorporate steel and polymer. And we can talk more about some of those things, which make those unique. And we've already won 2 awards this year for those. And so I think what sets us apart is we have a very strong value proposition because we have carbon smoke line now. I don't know if you guys have seen that. So basically what we did, just so you guys know, is we took our magazines, we made them a little darker. What did that do? Well, that hid visual blemishes. So it made our scrap go way down, and that made them more affordable. And that's why carbon smokes are cheaper than the clears. A lot of people are like, why is carbon smoke cheaper than clear? Well, it's cheaper because we don't have to scrap as much because the visual blemishes are not noticeable.
I thought it was
And
because of a compound
Right.
in there that helped either the durability or the stability or whatever the case might be, that it just happened to add smoke to the matrix as opposed to
right.
being clear. I thought it was purely a yeah, an engineering
Engineering, yeah.
decision, not a business-driven decision, if you will.
And so, so what happened was we sat there and looked at where the industry was going. And when I say industry, I'm speaking specifically to our little corner of it, which is magazines. And after 2020 and 2021, when sales were crazy and COVID happened and all the stuff, we knew that the economy was probably heading in a bad direction. We knew that consumers were going to have a hard time.
Mm.
People's wallets were going to get tighter, just like where we are right now. I feel like there's a lot of people struggling out there to put food on the table and to pay the rent, so to speak, right? And when that happens, what does it mean for us? Well, it means that if you're struggling to pay your bills, you probably don't have $20 or $40 to go spend on firearm accessories, right? So we felt that was probably the way things were heading. So what we did was we tried to look for ways to try and increase the value proposition for the consumer. And so what we found was that by adding some more smoke colorant to the plastic mix and darkening the plastic, that a lot of the visual blemishes that we experience when we're molding these things kind of just disappear. And when that does that, the scrap rate goes way down. And when the scrap rate goes way down, then things get
Yeah,
cheaper. And when they get cheaper, we can pass those savings on to the consumer. And again, just trying to make an even stronger value proposition for people.
that's great. I love that.
Yeah, you're not really detracting at all from the ability to be translucent to the extent that you want to know basically how many rounds you got left. And no, that's great. No, I think that's
And
fantastic.
so now the second part of my two-part question, explain to people who haven't read your website because quite frankly, most people probably haven't. What's the ETS way? What's that about?
Well, I think I've sort of touched on a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think that if I had to really sum it up in a way that's not pre-written and rehearsed, if you will, is basically if as an owner of the company and one of the designers and engineers and all the things that go into this and being in charge of manufacturing, we're a medium-sized company. And so that means I wear a lot of hats, just like I'm sure a lot of people that listen do, and everybody sort of gets that. But I think our focus is if we can't bring something to the table that is a benefit for the consumer, for the customer, we're not going to do it. We don't want to make a product that everybody else is making just to make one and try and sell it, because I think that's a losing recipe. I think consumers eventually see through that. I think that they get tired of people throwing a bunch of stuff at them that is either subpar or just another of the same thing that everybody else is making. So we try really hard when we look at a project to take a step back, try and get outside the normal scope and the box that everybody else is in, traditionally speaking, and try and look for new ways, whether that be again materials or processes, or ways to manufacture things. And we can talk about that with the hybrids that haven't been done before. And we try and look at ways to do that to bring more value. And again, that can be in the form of less cost, higher performance, both, whatever it is. But really, I think that what we really stick to is two things that are just fundamentally important to us as a company. Number one is firearms are an intrinsic part of this country and the history and the freedoms that we enjoy. And I'm one of those guys that think nothing should be illegal, period. Like it doesn't matter. Like we should all have fully automatic machine guns. They shouldn't be illegal for responsible, law-abiding people. And so that's kind of my take. My take is kind of a no holds barred. I don't think any regulations are lawful. I think that we're going to see a lot of these magazine capacity limits and some of these other things overturned. But that's kind of our position, and it's a no,
Yeah.
it's an unapologetic position. And I think that so guns are fundamental to us. And I think that our approach to trying to make them better for people is sort of what drives us to try and make, again, a better product, a different product than what everybody else has. And that's where, like you saw, the clear mags and the durable mags. And just to kind of give you guys a perspective, when we first came out with our first AR mag, most people make their AR mags out of glass nylon, right? Glass reinforced nylon. It's a very common material. If you take one of those magazines and you load it with 30 rounds and you drop it from, say, 4 or 5 feet on concrete on the feed lifts, almost every magazine that's made out of glass nylon will break, it'll crack almost the first time. And if it does it the first time, it will certainly do it the second time. And I know this because I've done hundreds and hundreds of these tests. And so our magazine and our material, just to give you some perspective that kind of maybe means something to people, we take them out 20 foot up on the mezzanine in the factory and we'll drop them on concrete from 20 feet fully loaded and they won't break. And that's a different level of durability. That's why we offer a lifetime warranty on every magazine, on everything we make. And a lot of to my knowledge, I don't think any of our competitors offer a lifetime warranty on a magazine because, like I said, most people view magazines as a disposable item. If it breaks, you just throw it away and get a new one. And one of the things we were trying to do, speaking to trying to add value, is trying to make something that people could buy and not have to worry about it again. And if they do break it, I had a guy call in when we first started up and said, yeah, I was trying to break your magazine. And finally we did. And I was like, how'd you break it? He said, well, I had my son pitch it at the retaining wall like a baseball. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. He said, so after 2 hours of him and his buddy trying to break it, they gave it to their kid. And he finally broke it. And I gave him a new one anyway, because we offer a lifetime warranty. It doesn't matter. But he was so impressed with that. And those are the
That
kind of
is
stories
abuse.
we
I mean,
love.
that's deliberate abuse. I mean, no,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, okay. I mean, the whole I dropped it out of a helicopter at 10,000 feet. I
Yeah.
mean, come on. So,
Right.
well, that being the case, I suppose that if you have that kind of confidence in your product, I mean, was there a time when maybe you got a lot of returns while you were trying to figure it out, and then it got better? And let me cite an example, and this isn't based on a defect, but it's an observation I made when I was back in a freer state, like back at the SHOT Show and stuff like that. I was able to look at
Hmm.
some of like your 10 round magazines that are okay in California, and then like
Yeah.
The Omega magazine, and I noticed the way they stack is different. And I didn't know
Yeah.
if, for example, the reason that, for example, you make a 10 round magazine and the way to get there is it appeared to me, and I could be wrong, that you thickened the walls on the side so that they didn't, the stacking was, let's say, less efficient. And that way you
Mhm.
also maybe gain some strength as opposed to the Omega that stacked more like you'd see in an AR magazine. Um, and maybe that's a way to mitigate, people abusing it or something like that, just through
Well,
design elements.
yeah, no, those are great questions. And these are some of the things I love these questions because sometimes when you're on the inside looking out versus the other way around, you sort of take for granted, right? Some of the things that we know and some of the design choices and things that we do. To answer the question about the 10 rounders, the stack that's in the 10 rounders, we didn't make the whole wall thicker. We made the rib that runs up the side of the wall thicker. And we did that basically to control the stack. And so basically what we did to sort of simplify this is we took a double stack magazine and we turned it into a single stack. And we did that to take up space so that it would be a 10 round magazine and be compliant with, for example, California or a restricted
Yeah.
state.
It's kind of stack
Um,
and a half, really, in a
yeah,
way. I
yeah,
mean,
that's what I was going to say. There are
yeah,
ones that are stack and a half. And let me give you an
yeah.
example. So we have a 17 and a 19 10 rounder. And by the way, those 10 round models are still some of our best sellers. I mean, I think they're, literally like 7 or 8 or 9 on our best selling list. So they're very, very popular magazines. But basically, the Glock 19 magazine is a shorter magazine, right? Because it's made to go in the compact Glock,
Right.
and so that
Hmm.
stack is a stack and a half because we had to have a little bit more slack, so to speak, right, to fit the 10 rounds in that space. On this Glock 17 10 rounder, it is truly a single stack. They're vertical. They're basically 100% vertical because we had enough space to do that. There's not a benefit performance wise to either one. A single stack magazine will always run more reliably than a double stack magazine. Okay. It's just the nature of just like a 10 round magazine will always be more reliable than a 30 round magazine because physics, less weight, less moving parts, less pieces, and all those things. So that being said, that like the stack that you see in the Omega magazine is a true double stack. We call it's a single feed. So it tapers to a single feed, a single presentation, right? Where the round is up against both feed lips and it centers in the magazine, and then the firearm strips that round off, and that's how it's presented to the weapon. So that is the standard de facto, if you will, for most pistol magazines. You're seeing a new trend though. The new trend now, I was actually had a meeting about this last week. We were looking at the trends for some of the sales out there, and amazingly, I believe that 6 of the top 10 selling pistols for the first 2 quarters of this year are micro carries, right? So we're talking SIG 365s, we're talking Hellcats, we're talking all those things. And so that's the new trend. And basically, that's a double stack with a little bit of a single stack over top of it to try and save some space where the mechanics, like the trigger bar and all the things that are up in the firearm, are. And that's sort of the point. It just allows them to have a thinner form factor on the frame of the firearm. And so that's the new trend, but they still function largely the same as a double stack, basically, magazine. And that's the trend. That's how they fit more rounds. They're really a double stack magazine with a thin frame and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different configurations. A Glock 43X, for example, is a stack and a half. I call it, it's a wide single stack magazine, which is why some companies out there have made like 15 round flush fit magazines for those, because they basically removed the plastic and made thinner walls and took up that space. So there's a lot of different configurations, for magazines, and the way that those stacks are set up is sometimes it has as much to do with the gun they're going in as it does the actual firearm itself. But to answer your question, have we learned along the way? Have there been any aha moments or any big lessons, so to speak? I think the biggest one that we ever came across was the magazines were performing pretty flawlessly for the first 1,000 or 2,000 rounds. And we found that after a certain amount of time and rounds that they would start to get sluggish. And when I say sluggish, the stack would not advance sometimes as quickly as it needed to keep up with the firearm, or sometimes they wouldn't advance at all. And what we found out was that what happens is during the gases, in the way that most pistols work, of course, with a Browning action, is you have a lot of that gas going back into that area. And in that gas is a lot of carbon. And as you guys probably know, carbon is one of the hardest things on earth. It's stuff diamonds are made out of. And so carbon actually will embed itself with the pressure of the rounds pushed on the walls. Over time, the
Right.
carbon embeds in the plastic. And when it does that, the plastic starts to become more like a sandpaper and not a nice lubrous material like it is when it's brand new. And so we really had to come up with a way to try and prevent this phenomenon from happening. Or what we had was, after a few thousand rounds, they could become real, hit or miss in terms of reliability. So what we did, and it was a very simple solution, which surprised us, is we put oil inside the magazine. And putting oil, a lot of people see
Oh,
that in the magazine. They think, oh, they put oil in the magazine to kind of lube the magazine. And yes, that's sort of true, but not really. What happens is the oil catches a lot of those contaminants, and it prevents them from being embedded in the wall. It just moves around and slides around and doesn't do the thing that we just talked about, where it becomes kind of like a sandpaper. And so that was one of the big moments where we took a magazine that, after a few thousand rounds, may not be as reliable as steel. And by the way, fun side note, I was at SHOT Show. I don't remember what year it was, probably 2019 or 2018. I don't remember now. And a couple of engineers from Glock, from Austria, came up to the booth, and they wanted to talk to me. And they were very excited to talk to another, for lack of a better term, magazine nerd. And we had some conversations about the stacks. And they said, do you know why the stack is a stack and a half? And I said, well, you got to have slack in the back of the rounds to keep the tips up. Otherwise, the tips will fall down and it won't feed the weapon. And he got so excited. He was like, "Oh my gosh, you're probably one of only a handful of people in the world that understand this and know what's going on with this." And so we had a good conversation. But they told me that the steel lining inside of Glock magazines was heat treated and hardened. And I didn't know that previously. He said, "You know why?" And I said, "No, why?" And he said, "Because if they didn't heat treat and harden the steel, the carbon would do the same thing to the steel. It would embed in the steel and it would create so much friction that they would stop running after they got dirty." And so that goes to show you some of the stresses, the level of stresses, and some of the things we're talking about is that even steel has to be hardened in order to make this thing run right and make it run well and reliable and all these kind of things. So magazines are very, very complex little things. And honestly, most of the time, they're probably the number one cause of failures in a lot of modern firearms because, modern firearms have gotten very, very good. So
Oh, in our experience, there's no doubt about it. I mean, pretty much anybody who goes to the range has Bet Your Life magazines. These magazines are the ones I will carry with me and bet my life on if the situation arises. Then I have these kind of secondary magazines work almost flawlessly all the time. Very occasionally, a failure to feed. And then you got the ones that's like, well, I don't want to throw it away, but I don't really want to keep it
right,
anywhere.
right. Well, that's the old proverbial. We have the carry bags, right? And then we have range mags is what we talk about, right? And I think a lot of
Yeah.
consumers, a lot of gun people feel the same way. They've got, like you just said, they've got the ones kind of like your different ammos, right? You got your range ammo and you've got your defense ammo, and those are two
Yeah.
different things, right? And that's sort of what led us down the path of going to the hybrids, is we took everything we learned for 10 years on magazines, from materials to the stresses to what makes a magazine unreliable or very reliable. And we tried to say, if money were no issue and we were going to make the best magazine in the world, what would it be? And that's kind of a little bit of the approach we took there, with those. And we started looking at the high stress areas. It's preferable to have steel. The rest of the areas, it's not preferable to have steel from a weight perspective and from a visibility perspective. And so we went down that path, and that's kind of where the hybrid is literally, at the risk of sounding, silly, it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, for the consumers who don't know what the hybrid you're talking about, it is the Omega line. And
Yeah.
when I had the opportunity, trying to load that, I mean, we're going to talk speed loaders in a couple of minutes, and I don't want to forget that. But just loading one by hand, I noticed how much easier it was to get the rounds into the Omega magazine than the standard magazine, because the lubricity and probably to a degree the hardness of the feed lips.
Yeah.
And I also did have the opportunity to do my own little informal drop testing and stuff like that, and found that, yeah, you're right, they wouldn't fail. In fact, the only magazine I've ever had personally fail was a Glock factory magazine. And it's because the polymer, I think, just aged out and split on the back. And well,
Yeah.
it was done. So, but along the lines of, well, kind of a two-part question. It's sort of, how do you develop, like, the inspiration for new products, how you develop them, and then how do you vet them and test them before you get them out there? I mean, I don't think that you do what Microsoft does with their operating systems and turn the entire consumer base
Everybody's a beta tester.
into or for that matter, the alpha tester. But I
Right.
think, I mean, do you have
Yeah.
professional teams that do this for you, either competition or in-house? And how do when do you decide it's time to add new SKUs? Because the opportunity space says that there's something that not being addressed in the market that you can do better.
Right. Right. That's a great question. So first of all, when we try to identify products, I think that process, we to a certain extent have sort of found our niche, if you will, in the market space, which is magazines. And so we look around at magazines, or firearms that come out, firearms that have been out, and we look at, if for us, mostly it's a numbers game in terms of. I'll give you a great example. Scorpion CZ. We make magazines for the Scorpion CZ. I think we have for that particular gun, I think we have 30 and 40 rounders. Okay. And the reason we did that is because so many people contacted us when those guns came out and said, "Hey, I've got these factory CZ mags." And again, I'm not knocking them. I love the gun. It's one of my favorite guns to shoot. But they said, I stored it in my safe, and then I came back, it was loaded, and one of the feed lips broke off of it, and the rounds shot out everywhere, and blah, 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 blah. It's a story we kept hearing over and over and over again. And honestly, it's not a shocking story because I think what a lot of people do is they want to make a clear magazine, and a lot of people who don't know and haven't done all the diligence like we did back in the day, they just make it out of a polycarbonate or something like that. And so what happens is that whole creep thing we talked about earlier. If you overstress it, eventually it'll lead to rupturing, and it just breaks off, it cracks off. And so that's what was happening with a lot of those factory CZ magazines when they were first released, is the Philips would break off. And so we had a ton of people asking us for magazines. And so I said, yeah, this is a need that needs to be addressed. And so we did. So we made the magazines for that. And that was a good example of, I saw something that was deficient and it needed to be fixed. And so we did. There are other cases where they come out with a magazine, for example, the SIG 320, and there's nothing wrong with a factory SIG 320 magazine. They're just expensive. They're $50, right? So we said, well, let's come out with a magazine that hopefully people can afford. And so we have magazines. Actually, I think this week we're shipping the first Omega SIG 320, which we're pretty excited about. So that's going to be shipping out, I think, tomorrow or Wednesday. So those will be going out. But the whole point of that was to make a magazine, again, that is as reliable as an OEM magazine, but at a far less cost. In this case, it'll be $20 instead of $50. Wow. And you also have the visibility of the ETS polymer, right? So I think it's kind of a win-win there, and we're excited about that for those guys. Now, the second part of your question is testing, right, and development. So that is, one of the things we utilize a lot for prototyping and stuff is 3D printing, right? So we'll come up with a concept, we'll do a design, we'll 3D print it. It takes about 12 hours. We have a part that is not good enough to go through a lot of testing, but we have a part that's good enough to go through very, very initial testing. So we'll make sure that it fits. We'll make sure that it works. And you can shoot a couple hundred rounds through a 3D printed magazine, for example, or whatever it is. So it's kind of a proof of concept, if you will. And then from there, once we feel good about that, then it's time to spend the real money. And now you're talking injection molds and tools or stamping tools or whatever it is. And that's where, I tell people that to bring a new magazine to market, from the time you look at design work to testing to tooling and all the things, it's a minimum of $500,000, and more realistically, probably like $750,000. Okay, is roughly what you're looking at by the time you do all the testing and all the design work and the engineering and then the tooling, because the tools themselves are very, very, an injection mold tool for a magazine is probably close to $250,000. So that's just for the tooling. So it's an expensive endeavor if you do it right, and it takes a lot of testing. And a big part of that cost is testing. And so what we do is we do a ton of testing in-house. And when we feel good about what we're seeing, then we'll let people outside the company, which will be some of our partners on shooting teams, professional shooters, some other military people and things like that, a lot of law enforcement friends that we have at training facilities like FLETC, and stuff like that. So we'll give them to them, say, hey, go do what you do with them and let us know what you see. And that's a really good thing, because no matter how good you are and no matter how much time you spend in a quote unquote lab or a controlled environment, you will never be able to sort of replicate everything that it'll see in the real world. So yeah, that's a big part of the testing, is letting other people get their hands on them and go out. Like for example, a lot of people shoot out in the desert. Sand, as you guys can imagine, yeah, right? Sand is a killer, right, for magazines, for the reasons. And so again, getting them out in those different environments, we send them all over the country. We have partners that help us do all that stuff, and it's actually a pretty fun process, because we've gotten to know a lot of those guys through the years and gals, and getting their feedback is really invaluable to sort of the final part of that, if you will.
There's a couple partners that you haven't engaged yet out here on the left coast who would love to see some of the 10 round magazines come our way for testing, because, hey, who in the other states wants to test a 10 rounder? Nobody wants to do that. They want the full capacities, not the reduced capacity that we have. Yeah, we definitely would be into providing that QA.
Well, the good thing is I know a guy that can get you guys hooked up with this, and we love that too. Again, as we meet people, this is kind of the way that this goes, right? We'll get to know people, and they'll offer to do this. And typically, what I find is the people who offer to do it, they really like it. They like not only being a part of it, but getting to help with finding problems potentially before they become real problems, and getting to give feedback. People feel they have skin in it, and it's a process that we enjoy. It's one of my favorite parts as one of the guys who helps design these things, is interacting with our people. It's one of my favorite parts of this whole thing.
I was just going to say one of the things is, I mean, you earlier talked about putting 5,000 rounds in a single day. Um, Sadly, we are frugal firearms. I don't think I've ever put more than you know 500 or 600 out in a day. I can't
Well,
afford it.
and
We just don't
yeah,
have the coin
that's
to do it.
that's the thing. Me, the personal me, I don't do that. I don't go shoot 5,000 rounds a day. And back in 2020 when all that stuff hit, there was times where I was having to call in favors at federal and other places just to get enough ammunition for our testing, right? When
Yeah.
ammunition was short, because we have very specific protocols that we follow for testing, and if we don't put the rounds through it, we can't check that box, right? It doesn't matter if you run
Right.
90% of the rounds through it. If we don't check the proverbial box, as they say, then that thing is not ready to move on to the next phase. And so yeah, that's a thing. And I get where you're coming from. And now, sadly, I don't, other than testing guns, I don't do much recreational shooting anymore. I used to a lot, and now I just don't
Well,
because
you run a company. I mean, you've got
yeah.
the things to do, and and you're a father and things like that. I mean, all that stuff uses up time. Do you have? I don't know whether you do or not. Contracts or you supply either various militaries or law enforcement, professional organizations that are not just competitor type.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. We do not have a contract, like an actual military wide contract. What we do is we supply several smaller units because their purchasing is at their discretion, right? And we've supplied stuff like here's a great example. When you talk about the clear and the see through and stuff, the Treasury Department liked our magazines because they
Hmm.
have two loadouts. One for the ground when they're transporting on the ground, which is full metal jacket, and then when they're in the air, they have frangible rounds, right? So they actually have clear
Oh.
magazines so they can see which ones they're grabbing and going out of the locker, so to speak, before they leave. It's another thing with training facilities and stuff like that. Having a clear magazine is just another added layer of safety when you have certain requirements like that. Like round counts are another good example, like correction facilities or stuff like that. Law enforcement agencies, a lot of those guys have to do a round count at the end of a shift. And so normally for them, that meant they had to unload the magazine, count the rounds, and then load it back, which sort of sucks, as you guys know from doing the whole loading thing. So having a clear magazine, they don't
Hmm.
have to do that. They can look at the magazine, count them in the magazine, and don't have to go through the act of unloading and reloading the rounds. So those kind of things. But yes, we do supply various law enforcement agencies, and we do supply various units and some other stuff like that around. We have not won any major contracts yet. That's a very difficult thing, and it takes
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
tens and tens of years. And so it's one of the things we hope for one day. But
I work for I work for the Navy. I understand the speed
okay,
of government. I
then
get
you
that.
get it.
Absolutely.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
talked about loaders. So talk about the speed. Yeah, I mean that's the product. I'm not sure whether I owned your speed loader first or some of your mags. I don't recall, but
Right.
it's such a different product. Obviously, they're complementary products, but it's so damn good. And I to me, it's just the leader in that industry. But I have a couple, for different calibers. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, first of all, I love hearing the compliments. That's one of my favorite things in the world is to hear somebody say that they're using the product and they love it, and it makes their life better, easier, whatever. So basically, the way this came about, again, I'm the guy that has to. Well, I used to be the only guy. Now we have a team of guys, but I have to go shoot mags and test them, and that means some long days, and some sore fingers and all the things that go with it. And so I'm not afraid to mention competitors. I used to use a Mag Lula, Up Lula, which I tell people now is a good
Good
product.
product. Yeah.
And I consider it to be more of a thumb saver, not really a speed loader, because you still pick up each round and load it individually,
Correct.
but still a good product nonetheless. And I used it, and it just took so long. And so I'll give you an example. A week or two ago, I had to go test a magazine, and it was some of the final rounds of testing for some of the first offs for the SIG mags and all that stuff. And I had to go run 2,000 rounds through one mag in a day. And I went and did that, and it took me 40 minutes. And most people, again, if you shoot with any regularity and you load your mags and all that stuff, you would know that shooting 2,000 rounds by yourself in one magazine where you don't have 20 magazines that you went preloaded with would take a lot longer than 30 or 40 minutes.
No thanks.
And
No,
that's
no,
yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
exactly. And that's kind of the deal. So, I can blaze through this stuff and get my work done in a much faster time. So that's kind of how it came to be. That's kind of what drove me down that path. When you start talking about the mechanics of it, the rifle loader is fairly simple. The rifle loader, our rifle loader is really cool because it works with a lot of different calibers. It goes down to a 9mm. It'll do 5.56. It does most in between. It goes up to an AK-47, so you can load 7.62 rounds. So it works with a ton of different calibers and a ton of different platforms. And a lot of people don't know that. I think, as far as I know, we're the only people that make a speed loader that is sort of a universal speed loader for rifles, that works with most stuff. And so that's exciting. It's fast and it's easy. And then the pistol loader is a little bit different animal because of the way that it has to load. So in looking at it, the way that a round is stripped out of a feed lip and then hits a feed ramp in a gun, goes up into the chamber. That's sort of the motion, if you will. So the idea behind the loader was that idea in reverse.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And it took, again, I know it looks simple if you look at it and look down in it. It took me months and months of tweaking angles and changing angles and multiple angles and all these things to try and get it right. And then once I got it right, I was working on a Glock magazine. Then the challenge was to try and make it work with different magazines. And then I realized something that was even more difficult, which was that the shapes of projectiles on all these ammos are different. So you would have one ammo that would work really, really well, and then one ammo that wouldn't load at all. We've gotten it down to where it's pretty good. It works with most ammos. There's a few weird ones out there, but it works with most ammos. It works with most magazines. There's a few that we have a list of that it's not compatible because the feed lips are too long. But for the most part, if you guys haven't seen it, for the listeners that are listening, you scoop up 10 rounds at a time, put your magazine in the thing, and then you basically push 10 rounds in at a time, and it doesn't hurt the magazine, and it's super, super fast. I did a race one time with a video with some of my friends and my brother, and one of them had a Lula, one of them was loading by hand, and I had my speed loader, and it took me just under 9 minutes to load 1,000 rounds. And the next closest was the Lula, and he had loaded 180. And then the guy that loaded by hand had loaded 135. So that gives you some perspective as to how much faster our speed loader is than really anything else on the market.
So let's talk future products. Is there anything that no, our listeners have not signed NDAs? So, but is there anything that we're looking for in your future that, either, specific products or categorically, maybe you're looking at some areas that, your experience indicates are underserved, or you just see the opportunity space where, what, we have an idea that nobody else has?
Well, I think that in the immediate future, we spent 2 years that the Omega magazine that we developed, we spent largely, maybe 2.5 years now, I guess, developing that technology. We have several patents pending on that. And so we kind of put our eggs in that basket, if you will, because we feel that those are the future of not just our company, but also I think that if we have this conversation, or at least my hope is that 10 years from now, people will see how good these magazines are. And we have talks with several large gun manufacturers for OEMing for them that we're in talks with and things like that. So, at the end of the day, I think that those magazines are better than just your typical steel magazines, because one really cool aspect of them, one of the most time consuming and expensive parts of making a steel magazine is welding the seam up the back of them, and then you have to grind it flat, right? And when you do that, it heats up, and then they warp, and then you have to straighten them, and then you got to send them out for heat. It's a time consuming process. The stamping machine can stamp them out every few seconds, but the process of welding and grinding is a 30-second process. So it's quite a bottleneck. It's very expensive. The robotics to do a weld on them is like, $500,000 to $1 million. So it's just a very expensive and time consuming process. So when we looked at making the hybrids, one of the big challenges was, if we made the metal part welded like all the other metal magazines out there, it would have been so cost prohibitive that it would have been the cost of 2 magazines. You'd have been paying for a metal magazine and a plastic magazine at the same time. And we knew that that's not what consumers are looking for, right? So the answer was this joint that we came up with. And if you have one of those in your hands, or you guys look at it, you could see sort of we call it the Omega joint, because it looks sort of like an Omega.
Well,
And
we don't because we're in California, but I will,
yeah, I know,
but I
I
will tell you,
know.
but I know what you're talking about. It's this, it's essentially, it's like a key for the listeners. It's like a keyed fit, basically.
Yeah, it's almost like a dovetail, right? A
Yeah.
dovetail joint
Yes.
on woodworking
Yeah.
or something like that. So basically, we use the strength of the metal instead of plastic to sort of form the joint, and then we flow plastic in and around that, and it's sort of we call it a poly weld for lack of a better term. I don't even know if that's trademarked or not, but we call it a poly weld joint instead of a weld. And we made all the stresses on the plastic compressive stresses because plastic is about 30% stronger under compression than it is under tensile. So it excels at that, and we used it for that, and we designed it around that. And so that's one of the things, when I talk about some of the things we kind of pioneer, it's not always a material. In this particular case, for the Omega magazines, it was how do we make this without the cost of welding and all the processes and all that stuff? Because then, what are we bringing to the table? And so this was the answer. And I'm proud of it. It was clever. We've won 2 awards for innovative, accessory of the year and all this other kind of stuff. So it's something that we're excited about, and I think in the future, this is going to be a new bar for what a pistol magazine could be. It can be more affordable. It can be see-through. It can be all the things you want. It's lighter. Our magazines weigh a third of what an all-steel magazine weighs.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of upside to it. And as far as like specific products that we're coming out with, we are working on a 15 round flush fit for a Glock 43X, which a lot of our cut, like that's our most requested product. And this technology is what allows us to do. You couldn't do that in plastic before. We would not. If you tried to make a magazine out of plastic that was 30 thousandths thick, it would be like a wet noodle. It would kind of be bendy and flop around and all this stuff. So with this technology, it allows us to make magazines that we previously could not make out of all plastic. And it allows us to target some of the firearms that are new, like the micro carries, as well as some of the oldies, like the Berettas. Like a good example is a Beretta. You can't, the Beretta M9, you can't make a pistol magazine for that out of all plastic. It simply will not be strong enough. Now that we have this technology with the steel in it, we can. And so that right now is where our focus is. And over the next year or two, our goal is to try and roll out as many of these as we can that make sense. And try and make something for everybody.
Outstanding. So finishing out here a little bit, do you have any funny closer type stories, things like that, little anecdotes or stuff like that? And the other thing I also wanted to do was, give you the opportunity to talk about your website or other events that you're, whether they be conventions or shoots or things like that you're going to be attending where people could come get hands-on on the product.
Well, yeah, a funny story. I'm not the funniest guy in the world, and I'm trying to think of anything that might be, firearm industry related, that would be appropriate for this conversation.
It is a clean show, right?
Yeah, no, I know it is. I know
Yes,
it
it
is.
is.
And so, there's nothing that really comes. And I thought about this before we kind of got into this, and I just couldn't really come up with something. So I'll leave the comedian stuff for the comedians. But when it kind of where we're at, I mean, I'm talking about in terms of people coming out and meeting us or seeing us and all that kind of stuff. I'm a very private person. So this is the first podcast I've ever done. A lot of people, it is. It absolutely is.
Do you know what I was going to tell you? You know what I was going to tell you off air? I was going to tell you, off air that, having now listened to you, you're extremely efficient at this. I mean, you're really good at this. And you should probably,
Yeah.
ours is the best podcast in the firearms industry, bar none, in my opinion. And we're honored that you, I guess, having not done this before, granted us the opportunity, because it was, the listeners don't know this. I've been talking to your subordinates about doing this for almost 2 years now. So
yeah, it's been a while, and I'm glad that we finally got to do it. For those of you that don't know, we were going to do this last week, and we had some really bad windstorms, and it blew a tree over on my house, literally the day that we were supposed to do this. So I had to reschedule for this week, which is Thanksgiving week. But
well, I can see in the video feed, I can see your ceiling, so it looks like it didn't hit that part of the house.
Yeah,
there's not a tree branch coming through that.
Luckily, it wasn't too bad, and we got everything cleaned up from that. I'm in Tennessee. For people that don't know, again, I probably should have mentioned this. We're a Tennessee-based company. We do have some customer service girls that are up in South Bend, Indiana, and a lot of people say, why Do you all have two locations? The answer to that question is my business partner, Jim, is he's in South Bend, Indiana. So he sort of took that responsibility while I'm doing the manufacturing and the design and stuff like that. He sort of heads up the sales aspect, customer service, and all that kind of stuff. I had a background a long time ago in customer service as well. That was one of our, I probably should have mentioned that one of our core tenets of our company is we always take care of customers because I'm a firm believer that no matter what kind of mistakes we make, and we're not perfect, guys, as you know, like everybody, we try our best to not let a bad magazine out the door. But if you happen to get one, give us a call, and we'll replace it or do whatever you want us to do. We always take care of the customers because we're here for them basically. And I think a lot of times in today's world, it's sort of lost, right? Picking up the phone. If you call us for customer service, you're going to talk to a girl in South Bend, Indiana, and she's going to take care of you. She's going to get you whatever you need. That's what we do. We don't ask questions and we don't try and give people a hard time. We just want to make sure they have what they need and that they're taken care of. But all that being said, we're in Tennessee. The manufacturing is done here in Tennessee. Every part is made in Tennessee. Everything we make is made in the USA. And we're proud of that.
Nice. Yeah.
And
Nice.
again, I'm a very private person, so this is my first podcast. I don't speak publicly a lot to people, not because I don't do it. Again, I think you guys can tell I would talk about our business and the things that I'm excited about. I could do this all day long, but I don't really do it because I don't like. I'm not on Facebook. I don't do those kinds of things. I don't like people knowing my business and all that stuff. So I'm a very private person, and I feel like in some ways through the years, we've been in business now for 10 years. And I feel like in some ways it may be have sort of done us a little bit of a disservice because I think a lot of people in the industry don't know who we are. And when I say that, meaning who are the people right behind the company, so to speak, because I think more than in a lot of other spaces, I think consumers and people want to know, like, who are they doing business with? Who is the company? Who are the people behind the company? And all that kind of stuff. And I think it's important. So, that's one of the things why I wanted to kind of get out and let people kind of get to know me and let them get to know us, a little bit as a company. And, that's kind of what led to the kind of where we are right now.
Absolutely right.
We're honored that you took the time to talk to us because I really have enjoyed and learned quite a bit. Just from what you've been talking about, particularly about the carbon literally fouling or embedding itself both in steel, which I wouldn't never have considered, but into the plastic makes a lot of sense. So I've learned quite a bit just by listening to it.
I'll add that to tell you, Ken and I were talking before the show. It's kind of like, how are we going to turn an episode about magazines into an interesting show? I mean, because I'm not kidding. I was kind of like,
listen, I try to think about that every day.
like,
how do we make it more interesting for people?
This has been honestly one of our easiest episodes to date. And I mean, if you're familiar, I follow Formula One. Okay. And
yes.
Do you know what broke Formula One in the United States? I mean, it's been around forever. I used to watch it literally in the 80s. What broke it was Netflix with Drive to Survive. And do you know why? It's because they made it personal. They put, instead of just a helmet and a color of a car, the red car with the guy with the red helmet or something like that, now it's people. And you've done that today. You've put not a face because we're not on YouTube, so this isn't video. You've put a voice to the company and that people are going to be able to relate to.
Well, I love that. And well, and on a side note, just so you know, I used to race cars as an amateur hobby, and I love Formula One too. I follow all of it, have for 20 years, and like I said, I used to race Vipers and Corvettes back before I had children, and my wife told me it was too dangerous to do that anymore. And so I love cars. I love fast stuff. Like besides guns, cars are probably my other love, if you want to call it that, as far as hobbies and stuff go. So it's something that I have a real passion. I love that stuff. I truly, truly love cars and firearms. So that's me.
Greg and I both have good classic cars ourselves.
But the one I drive every day is my Audi S6, but that's another story. So, hey, thank you, Eddie, for joining us again. Actually, really legitimately honored to have convinced you, because I imagine you've had other requests for podcasts, but for some reason ours resonated with you. Yes. And I think it was the right move. So thank you for joining us today. And Ken, any closing comments for Eddie?
No, Eddie, just it's been real pleasure, real joy. very much enjoy your products, and we'll try to take a look at some of the more California-friendly ones as time goes on. So I very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
No, guys, I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
I thought we were headed down the path to a man, this is going to be a hard podcast to make interesting, and boy was I wrong. That was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And being an engineer myself, I'm going to catch up to this guy at SHOT Show and learn some more and talk nuts and bolts and chemistry and stuff like that. So another topic that I wanted to bring forward. Oh, by the way, first off, new website. Change the website. It is now very easy for people to remember, frugalfirearmspodcast.com. That's it. No more going to other faces and things like that. All the contact information is still there. frugalfirearmspodcast@gmail.com if you want to put in any comments. We do obviously survive on things like ratings. So particularly if you are using Apple Podcasts as the distribution network for you, that's where about 3/4 of our stuff comes through Apple Podcasts. Definitely, please leave us a rating because that helps us show up.
And then also suggestions. If you guys have suggestions on things you'd like us to talk about, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, and the email's there for that. And the website is a very simple one, but it should be. Like, I didn't throw a bunch of stuff in there that we didn't need. It has the links to all our social media. It has the links to all our episodes. It has the links to our email address. But Thanksgiving is upon us. And, I've seen a lot of stuff on social media that's kind of unfortunate, where people who didn't get what they wanted in the most recent election kind of don't feel connected to their family anymore. And that's a mistake, I think, because
yeah,
you're going to live to
you will live to regret that. I mean, these are so even if somebody in your family doesn't agree with you, they're family. So treat them with respect, right. Invite them to the table. You share a common history, and you need to celebrate that. And this is the time of year to do that.
Yeah. And take a history lesson too, because I don't mean that. That sounds disrespectful. I didn't mean it that way. Take the history lesson that shows, the founding fathers, the early Congress, things like that. They had disagreements just as vigorous as what we have now, but they would also get together and pray for, in some cases, hours before entering a session. And they found the common space to get along. And that's the thing that you need to do as a family. Don't let don't be braggadocious about the fact that if you're on the winning side, and don't be overly depressed or despondent if you're on the losing side, because it's an ebb and flow process, isn't it?
Pendulum swings back and forth.
Yeah, but the one thing that doesn't swing back and forth, it only swings one direction, is time. So don't let time get away from you, and enjoy your family. So anything else, Ken?
Nope. With that, I think we can just close out.
Yeah, lucky number 13 coming up next. So thank you all for joining us. Good evening, everyone. Now you're ready for the ones with the big audiences. I mean, not Joe Rogan yet. Not yet Joe Rogan.
Yeah. Well, I know Joe. I actually know Joe.
Come on, man.